The St. Louis Cardinals are ramping up with spring training right now. Games are just around the corner. I'm sure you're seeing videos everywhere of batting practice, drills, all these different things. What will the young players and even rebounding veterans look like this year? What do the Cardinals and their players specifically need to do to make good on promise or to rebound from bad 2024 seasons? We have Nate Schwartz on from the pitchers list today to talk about different players and things that he's seen and what areas for improvement that different St. Louis Cardinals can make this year on this episode of Deal on the Cards. Hey, welcome back into Deal on the Cards. I'm Josh, Andrew, as always, and we're joined by special guests of Nate Schwartz from the pitchers list. We've been talking about getting you on here for a while, and so it finally worked out. And I think this is the perfect timing because I feel like we have a lot of different test cases and players to be talking about today. Before we jump in, for those who don't know you, Nate, can you introduce yourself? Tell them a little bit about maybe your background and specifically why you like St. Louis Cardinals, but then also what you do at the pitchers list and why we brought you on today.
Yeah, so I've been writing for Pitchers List, been in the space for 3.5, 4 years now, doing anything from just general player deep dives, fantasy content, kind of the whole 9 yards in the player and analytical analysis in the public space with Pitcher List. I've been a lifelong Cardinal fan, even though I grew up outside Chicago and had to defend the Cardinals with all of my honor at times. I've been a Cardinal fan through and through and a baseball fan my entire life. And, more and more as I've done writing and, worked into the Twitter or X or Blue Sky spaces, I always find myself interacting with, the Cardinals Twitter accounts, fans, and all of that. And it's, led me to, talking with you guys, and I'm glad we finally figured it out and we're able to find some time to come on and talk about some of these players that I know there are just so many interesting things going on that, there's a lot of open steps that this organization and these players can take this next year.
Yeah, and just as we've interacted on Twitter and seen your stuff, and whether it's read your pieces or just random things you throw on Twitter, X, Blue Sky, all that kind of stuff, I've been really intrigued by your analytical approach to things. And like, it's one thing for someone to say, oh, Jordan Walker needs to hit more home runs, but I think what you do a great job of is breaking down what some of the areas of improvement can be, specifically what the numbers and metrics are trending toward, and what are some actual tangible shifts that need to happen in order for these things to go down. And so I think fans really want to be able to hear these things, visualize these things, and see these things. I think you do a really good job, A, of breaking it down, and B, you've even brought some show and tell visuals today for those on YouTube who are able to, this is an incentive to watch on YouTube. If you're on audio, I promise we're going to talk through these, so you're not going to be like, what on earth are you talking about? But if you're a visual person like me, seeing some of these graphs sometimes are really helpful. And I remember the first time we talked about potentially getting you on, I had some questions about Jordan Walker, because I feel like within the Cardinals space, if there's a single player that people are most, whether it's concerned or interested in the development of and potential shifts in his game, it's got to be Jordan Walker. And rightfully so, right? Before JJ Weatherholt, he was probably the best prospect to be in the Cardinal system since Oscar Taveras. He's got the most hype. He was the guy that you go into 2023 and the Cardinals put him on the opening day roster, had all the promise in the world. People forget 2023, outside of being demoted, like when he came back up, was a really productive rookie season for a 21-year-old. And then things went south in 2024. We know about the ground ball issues, lack of power, all that kind of stuff. And he's a big dude, so it was kind of confusing at times. We know the defense, all that kind of stuff. But Nate, when you look at Jordan Walker, I know you're someone who, if I'm correct on this, I know you're hyped about him, excited about him, think he can do big things. What will it take for Jordan Walker to make good on his promise? What are the things that you're seeing that are flaws in his game, and what are the areas of improvement that he needs to make?
Yeah, so the first thing is, obviously we all want to see what the mechanical changes look like that he's talked about with working with Brant Brown in the offseason. I know there's a lot of clips going around social media about just the tweaks he's actually making. I know there's a lot about, his hand placement, but also just generally seeing how enthusiastic he is about the upcoming season is really encouraging as a fan, because there's just so much doom and gloom around the Cardinals right now, and what his 2024 was, frankly. And seeing him so excited is just really encouraging for a fan who, I do my public facing analysis, but we don't know what's really going on there. Seeing his confidence makes me confident that, we're going to see that 2024 is the anomaly in his career, not 2023. But within that, there are two places that I think he can take a big step forward: plate discipline and then just elevating the ball again. So starting with the plate discipline, last year he had a 5.5% walk rate, which was the lowest walk rate at any level in his pro career, and down 2.5% from 2023, which is pretty significant year-over-year changes. And his, like, if you look at his whiff rate, it actually improved from 2023 to 24. It was still a poor 30%, but it did improve by like 1%. But what I think is really interesting, going back to kind of the mechanical adjustments we've talked about, or he's talked about, is that he's discussed that how rigid his hands were and they weren't in the right place for him to make contact. And I know that there were countless moments last year where you're watching a game, it's, 1-2 count. I know that the pitcher's throwing a slider down and away. You know that the pitcher's throwing a slider down and away, and so does the pitcher. And he's swinging at it. No one can do anything, and that's that. And he's just created this, place where pitchers can attack, where they can throw this junk down and away. He's going to swing and get strikes, and they don't even need to worry about him lucking into something despite how much power he possesses. So I was looking a little bit closer, and he's faced some of the hardest pitch quality among hitters. So pitcher list, we have it's called PLV, or pitch level value. It grades pitches on a scale of 1 to 10 based on stuff, so similar to your Stuff Plus models, and then location, similar to your Location Plus models, and combined put something similar to a Pitching Plus number. But within that, we can look at every pitch. What is the quality of the pitch that a hitter is facing? And Jordan Walker is facing some of the hardest quality stuff among all hitters. And I think that's really interesting because he has kind of carved out the pitchers don't need to throw stuff that is competitive, that might get graded poorly because it hangs up in the zone. He is so susceptible to those breaking pitches that pitchers can just throw unhittable things and know that they're going to get results. But what's interesting is through like the last 2 weeks of September, when he got hot, I know he had that 5-hit game against the Yankees, and you started to see the signs of life. He actually was being less aggressive. And so what that did was it showed that so we're going to throw up.
I'll throw the graph here.
So right around that September 21st mark, he stopped being, he kind of turned on where his aggression was. And what happened was that pitchers had to go into the zone. They knew he wasn't chasing just anything and everything, and they had to give him more enticing pitches, which meant that there were pitches more susceptible to, the mistake in the zone that he could actually do damage with.
Interesting. So when you think about, because you brought up a good point, I think it's something that isn't talked. It's talked about a lot, but I think Jordan Walker's situation can sometimes get dumbed down to the fact that he hits too many ground balls, needs to hit the ball in the air. Fans hear about launch angle and they get really frustrated about the idea of him doing that. But I think the core of the issue that you really have acknowledged here is the fact that he keeps getting beat low and away in these pitches that are just first of all, they're not pitches he can do damage with, and second of all, they play right into the pitcher's hand every time. Pitchers are not going to stop attacking him there until he figures out a different game plan. Is part of that game plan the fact that he needs to figure out what to do with those pitches besides obviously being less aggressive toward them, laying off them more often? But is that something where if he's in a 2-strike count, he's just going to have to fight it off? And if it's 0-1, 1-1, whatever else, basically his goal is to keep alive in the count? Or is there something where he can do in his approach where maybe he's slashing those the other way a little bit more? He's got a different, maybe a game attack plan when pitchers are approaching him at the edges of the zone, low and away. And then hopefully over time, he's able to get them to come back middle in, up in the zone, whatever it is, and be able to crush those pitches, because that's something we saw in 2023 when he was doing really well. And I think it's really interesting that he mashed fastballs like no other in 2023. And it's something that across the board with Cardinals was a huge struggle in 2024, where it felt like he's probably so in his head about that low and away pitch that whenever he did get those fastballs to hit, it wasn't able to do damage. So is it as simple as he basically just needs to stop swinging at those low and away pitches? And sometimes you're going to get beat on them because the pitcher is going to make a good pitch. Or is there a way that he can have a different approach when he does take swings at those in the low in the zone? He can't just totally lay off them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's going to just be survive in advance, fight to the next pitch.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that, he crushed the fastball, and, we'll get to him later. Nolan Gorman crushed the fastball, and all they have to do is survive against the breaking pitches. Pitchers feel confident in throwing the fastball eventually. If they it will break. You're not just going to get all breaking pitches, even though, that's where baseball's trending. They're still going to throw the fastball, and players need to be ready to hit it. But I was looking just generally at those down and away pitches. Jordan Walker saw 30% of the pitches he faced last year were down and away. That of right-handed batters, that ranked 4th out of 338 who faced at least 200 pitches. So the two of the guys above him were Javi Baez and Salvador Perez. That is ahead of Aaron Judge and Bobby Witt Jr., guys who chase a lot. But he's in the tier right now of, these are the guys who we can throw anything to because we know they have no discipline. And that tells me that there's room to grow. It's not that he will forever be bound by the slider down and away. This is the bottom, and he can go up, and he can earn pitches that are more competitive by making better decisions. And then he'll have pitches to do damage with, because he'll never, yes, he's strong, and he'll, eventually lace one the other way or, over the fence to right field. But that's not where he makes his money. He makes his money by attacking the slider that gets left up because it was supposed to be below the knees instead of in the dirt.
Interesting. I mean, I know we've got a bunch of other players we really want to go through today, so I don't want to spend too much time Walker, but last kind of thing with that, is there anything else in his profile or anything else in his swing decisions, whatever that is, that you think are areas of improvement or things that he needs to capitalize on more? Or is it really kind of boiled down to, man, if you can lay off the low and away pitch, the rest of it's going to figure itself out?
It's mostly that, I think. The other thing is just generally elevating balls in play again. It's a pretty kind of standard criticism of his first 2 seasons. He ran 45% ground ball rates most of his minor league career. And then when he got to the majors, it spiked above 50. And he's hit a ball 115 before. The power is there. It doesn't need to be this massive fly ball guy. If you just hit a little bit more fly balls, most projection systems have him around 20 homers. He starts to elevate and start to show those changes, and it's not difficult to envision 25, 30 homers even this year from Walker.
Yeah, and to your point too, if he's swinging at low and away pitches, in general he's trying to pull them or pull what he's getting in the zone. That's a recipe for a ground ball to first base or pulled ground ball to third base too. So that can also help with it. But then, to your point too, the launch angle stuff, more optimal swing plane would be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what I think of Jordan Walker as well. Just the sliders in the dirt were frustrating to watch all season, but hopefully the swing decision changes that he'll be making will help him get better pitches and just be what we think he can be. And another player that we're looking at this season is Lars Nootbaar, and I just did some deep dive on some of his numbers for a video that's already out for our members. If you want to join our membership tier on YouTube, but it'll be out on Saturday for you, for everyone else. But Lars Nootbaar, the peripherals look amazing. You look at Baseball Savant, it's just all red. But some of the results maybe not as impressive as we would have hoped. Obviously, that has to do first and foremost with staying healthy and staying on the field. But he has hard hit rates that are up with some of the best players in the entire league. So what changes do you think Lars Nootbaar needs to make to his profile to maximize his output and become what Baseball Savant seems to think he can be?
So I do love the Baseball Savant sliders, because you open a Nootbaar page and it's why is this guy not a 5-WAR perennial all-star, 25, 30 home runs consistently, whatever. And that's because Baseball Savant, it doesn't capture on those sliders swing rate. He has some of the smallest swing rates in baseball. It's around Juan Soto, which is great. He gets on base. He has this high OBP, but I think he's just really holding himself back because of how good that batted ball profile is. Again, going back to kind of decision making with kind of what I was explaining with Jordan Walker with Lars Nootbaar, he has really just well below average in zone decision value. So this is a rolling graph here showing his in zone decision value throughout last season, and it's consistently like the season average is around the 10th percentile, but he had spurts where he was lower, and kind of towards the end of the season, he surged. And that's because he was a little bit more aggressive. He has the great batted ball profile, as I said, and he just needs to swing more. He can sacrifice, a percentage point or two of walk rate. He'll still get on base a ton. That won't completely alter his approach, but he just lets a lot of great pitches go by. And for a guy who has exceptional hard hit rates, exceptional barrel rates, and has the power profile, by all accounts, a 25 or maybe more homer guy, he's letting pitches go by that he would do that damage on. So I would like to see him take that next step and see the skills fully play out, because I think what Nootbaar has done in his time in St. Louis is we all envision what Nootbaar, the star player, is, but he walks so much and he is so passive that you end up seeing empty stats and numbers that don't exactly line up to the player that we're watching on a daily basis when he's healthy. So if he could be just, a tad more aggressive, attack more pitches, and, maybe make pitchers go out of the zone rather than having him just look by everything, we could really see him take his next steps and become the Nootbaar like we all want him to be and think he's fully capable of.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that you look back at 2020. Yeah, it's 2023, beginning of the season. Brendan Donovan kind of historically is the same issues where he's extremely selective, but it helped him be an on-base machine. He's top 15 in all baseball and on-base percentage since he entered the league. But you saw him make a shift. Beginning of 2023, he started to swing at first pitches a little bit more, knowing that he was taking fastballs he could do damage on. Struggled for a little bit, but then I think it was like a 55 game stretch where he was a 140 WRC plus guy. And like, I love Donnie, but he doesn't hit the ball nearly as hard as like Nootbaar is able to. But like Donovan showed that, like, hey, if you can marry some of that plate discipline later in the counts when you are behind the pitcher and the guy does have your number, and you start to tighten the zone a little bit, be a little bit more selective, you foul off the pitches you need to, but you take the walk if you can, but you do damage those early pitches, you could be a highly successful player. It doesn't seem like Nootbaar has been able to make that adjustment so far, to your point, that his selectiveness is almost, and like we celebrate, right? Like you see those graphs out there if he's 100th percentile in chase rate and like 90-something percentile in hard hit percentage. But it's like, okay, if Juan Soto can get away with that kind of stuff because he's Juan Soto, Lars Nootbaar, you got to swing more often. I think it's interesting that I can't remember who it was from MLB.com found that Nootbaar was tied for 8th with Shohei Ohtani in all baseball on highest blast rate per swing. But his point was Ohtani swung the bat way more often than Lars Nootbaar did. Part of that's because of health. And so some of these numbers will naturally get better if he's just on the field more often. But again, some of that, to your point, is he's not swinging nearly often enough. Do you have concerns or worries at all that, like, okay, so these numbers look amazing because he doesn't swing a lot, and when he does, he tries to swing at pitches he knows he can crush. If he's more aggressive, do you see maybe a potential for him to regress in some of these areas? Or do you think it's as simple as, hey, man, you've got the talent, just swing more often, and you're going to do damage more often?
I think it's very difficult to tell generally, just because, you don't know what's going through his mind when, if a coach tells him swing more, what does that do?
Yeah.
Are you making the wrong decisions now? Yeah. But I think there's some wiggle room for him to make the sacrifice. It doesn't need to be a lot. I was looking at Juan Soto's in-zone decision value, and it's closer to league average. And that the difference, given a similar batted ball profile, is that he sees the perfect pitch and swings more often than Nootbaar does. And that's how he gets to those upper echelon homer totals that Nootbaar, I don't think will sniff. So I think there's obviously room for regression in some sense, but he has wiggle room. He is so passive and his chase rate is, so good, so small that he can sacrifice a little bit of it. It's not going to end his game. Like I was saying with Jordan Walker, he doesn't need to be a full-time fly ball guy. It just needs to be a little bit better. With Nootbaar, he doesn't need to completely change his profile and be a free swinger. He just needs to, show that he can attack more pitches.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we all want to see Nootbaar stay on the field more often this year to even have the opportunity to do that, because that's part of the problem here. And it does feel like when Noot's on the field more consistently, he just gets better and better and better. It feels like it's a cyclical cycle. If he gets hurt, he starts slow, he finds himself, he goes on a heater, and then he runs into a wall or slides into a base weird, and he's on the IL again. So it's like, stay on the field more often. Maybe some of the stuff, maybe gets more comfortable. Maybe he's more aggressive when he's on the field more. I don't know if you could back that up at all, but yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But before we continue on, I want to thank a couple of sponsors of the podcast. As always, 314 Sports Cards and Collectibles, who's our presenting sponsor of Dealing the Cards. They're located at 9640 Olive Boulevard in Olivet. They're open 10 to 5 Monday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturdays. They buy, sell, and trade all sports cards and Pokemon cards. And they have the newest selections of packs, boxes, and single cards of local players and stars around the league. So you want a two-way Mesa win card like that. If you want hit Andrew's Prospect Oliver Marmol card, he likes to flex pretty often. Whatever you're in the market for, 314 is your place to go. We know many of you shop there already. Devin and the guys over there are awesome. So make sure you go check them out and let them know we sent you. And then we also have we're proud to be partnering with Underdog Sports, where you're able to play now in Missouri, Illinois, and I believe all surrounding states if you're a St. Louis Cardinal fan, or in other places in the nation. You got to check out Pick'em. It's so easy to play. You just pick 2 to 8 stats of your favorite players and choose whether they go higher or lower, and you can win up to 20 times your money if you go 5 for 5. If that sounds like fun, sign up with the promo code CARDS, which is on the screen, and you can download the app in the link in our description, and you get a first free pick plus a first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. We can't wait to see your entries. It looks like you can do spring training higher and lower already, so I think that's a little risky to be figuring out what stats are happening in spring training, but if you want to go for it, go for it. It's a fun way to play fantasy sports. But let's take a little bit of a detour from the bats. We've got more conversations on like Nolan Gorman, Nolan Arenado, and co to come. But one of the really interesting storylines going to spring is we knew Matthew Liberatore was going to be stretched out. Like that happens every spring. It's probably going to be the bullpen, but it's an option. And the 19 other Cardinals, the young arms that are capable of starting, but we'll see how many of them actually get a legitimate chance this year. But one name that we didn't really expect to be thrown in the mix was Kyle Leahy. And fans kind of know him as an interesting middle reliever, but even then, I don't think people held him in that high of regard unless you're Sandy, who holds every Cardinal reliever in high regard. But there's some interesting parts of his profile that make it think, okay, maybe this guy does have a starter's profile potentially. So I know that you were potentially interested in talking about Kyle Leahy and Matthew Liberatore's repertoires and whether it's playing out the bullpen or in the rotation. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the Cardinals' usage of Kyle Leahy and Matthew Liberatore?
I will just say you perfectly handled the Liberatore repertoire. That was was well done.
Thank you.
But that's about where the good stuff ends. I think there are better guys to give innings to. These are not the young guys the Cardinals should be giving innings to when you're thinking quote unquote, young pitchers. With Kyle Leahy, I don't think the arsenal is deep enough or good enough as is to be a starter's arsenal. His fastball is just really poor. It has, it's at 95 miles an hour now. If you stretch him out, does that go down to 94, 93? So then it's losing its effectiveness, and the shape of it is really struggles. It's a dead zone shape, which means that the pitch is moving kind of as the hitter expects. So the graph we're looking at here shows the movement relative to the expected arm angle. So a player like Tyler Glasnow, who gets a lot of ride on his fastball, would see that, four-seam fastball circle way above the expected area. but Kyle Leahy's is smack dab in the middle. What this means is that it's really hard for the pitch to get whiffs because hitters know where it's going. They visualized it. They can put the bat on the ball. And he also just doesn't have great command of the fastball either. And he throws this pitch like almost 40% of the time to righties and over 50% of the time to lefties, which is just completely like unsustainable for a starter. The slider and sweeper combo is intriguing, I think, for a reliever. The slider he kind of uses more as a cutter, which works against lefties and righties. He throws it in the zone a bunch. It gets a ton of weak contact. But the problem is that the sweeper doesn't necessarily come close to replicating and being effective enough as a strike tool to get whiffs consistently. I was looking at it, and the sweeper has a 1% called strike rate, which is kind of hilarious, all things considered. It's got a good swinging strike rate, which is nice, but looking at the strike zone plots of it, it's either right down the middle and it's hit, or it's completely out of the zone. And the place you want to put the sweeper is in that shadow zone. It's like the outer third of the strike zone all around, and then that area outside, where you're going to entice a hitter to get a whiff. And Kyle Leahy, among all pitchers with 100 sweepers thrown, ranks 121st out of 131 players for percent of sweepers thrown in the shadow zone. So he doesn't have a pitch that can get whiffs in like near the strike zone, which I find it very hard for him to kind of prove that to be a get through the lineup one time, get through the lineup two times. How are you going to adjust your approach when you don't have these consistent offerings? And, who's to say he's known about this and he's added something new. I think the changeup could be an intriguing pitch, but I think, how much he relies on the fastball and how inconsistent the secondaries are, I don't see him being a viable starting candidate for very long.
Yeah, and I do know that Leahy said at winter warm-up, and I haven't heard much about in spring training yet, that he was working on a new two-seam fastball, which theoretically could help him against lefties, which looks like his four-seamer, thanks to Redbird Farm Hands on this one, was hit at a 382 batting average and 735 slug last year, his four-seamer against lefties. Not great. Not what you want to see out there. So even if that's a way he can neutralize lefties, to your point, it's like, well, if he's really just got the sweeper to go to righties with, and that's more of an out-of-the-zone pitch to get guys to stretch out a little bit too. Like if he can't be competitive in the zone against righties, even if he figures lefties, it's hard to believe this guy can navigate a lineup up and down. But could he be a really highly effective reliever in short spurts for the Cardinals? Maybe that's something he can do. But then you look at Matthew Liberator. What are your concerns about the Cardinals potentially trying this whole thing out again with him? I'm skeptical about how serious they are with him on it. Maybe it's more of a, hey, we have options early in the season in case injuries happen and they're not ready to go to Quinn, or name whatever prospect. Seems like McGreevy, they'd be comfortable now, but maybe not Quinn quite yet. Who knows? But yeah, if they did try to do the Matthew Liberator experiments again, why would you be against it?
I think it's just because we've seen the song and dance already happen. We know what it is. Yeah. And unfortunately, we know it doesn't really work unless, again, he has something new. He can maintain that velocity he's shown in reliever spurts for the full, starting gig. I mean, that's what made Garrett Crochet. Obviously, his stuff is a lot better, but Garrett Crochet basically held his velocity from relieving to starting, and that turned him into this just lethal weapon. And Liberatore has this 2 mile an hour dip that just, his fastball and sinker are fine. I think he could command them a little bit better as he develops more. And I think, maybe there's a starter's framework in there, but I think it's tough knowing what we've seen. I like that he's shelved the curveball in exchange for the slider. He's done a very good job of using the slider as a pitch that can get whiffs in the zone and be an actual tool to lefties and righties. But without the fastball sinker effectiveness against righties, he's going to continue to struggle to be a starter. You need to be able to get right-handed hitters out to be a major league starter, and he has yet to prove that in long samples. So I think that ship has sailed, if not for the spot starts kind of as needed this year or potentially future years.
Yeah, I don't really want to see Liberator getting more starts. There's like 8 other options they could go to, and last year there were like certain times where there's like an emergency and like you really needed somebody to cover those innings. But I feel like this year there's like a bunch of guys knocking on the door, and if you're not trying to be competitive, like it's not worth wasting those starts, because those starts are important, right? Like for every start Miles Michaelis gets, that's a start that someone else doesn't get, and he's going to be on the opening day roster and have those. So giving a guy like Liberator starts who's a viable reliever, like it's totally fine. Like don't do that.
Yeah, like he's also said that he liked relieving, he liked the new role. So unless there's something else going on behind the scenes, I would like he seems to want to embrace that late reliever role, and I think he has the potential as a reliever to become a potentially lethal late inning option, but they just have to commit to that. We have to say that the starter experiment hasn't worked, but that doesn't mean he can't provide value to the 2025 Cardinals and potentially future Cardinals teams.
Yeah, we know the Cardinals aren't going to do this, and I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. You don't have to give some super in-depth option or answer to it, but I've been very much. I asked you about an experiment idea before the podcast. We don't have to get into in this, but the idea of Ryan Helsley as a starting pitcher always intrigues me, and it feels like from people I talk to, it feels like they kind of cut his development short as a starter, and he's got some of the offerings needed. He could bring the changeup back. He could use the curveball more often. His fastball obviously plays at an extremely high level of the bullpen, so taking some ticks off it wouldn't be a huge deal. And his slider is his best pitch, so it's not even like he's just a guy who just overwhelms you with 102. Is that something like, obviously he's not going to do it for the Cardinals this year. He's probably not even a Cardinal next year, but would you be shocked if Ryan Helsley signs with X organization this offseason and they are ready to try him out as a starting pitcher?
I would be surprised if a team signed him with the intention of making him a starting pitcher, because he's had some injury history, and if you're going to shell out good money for a top-end closer, that's pretty risky to try and take him into a starter. Yeah. And I don't think the Cardinals would try it, obviously, but I think it would be really interesting. I don't think stamina-wise it would necessarily work. He couldn't do back-to-backs, I think, 2 years ago. So I'm not really sure on how much he'd be built up, but I know he had teased a new cutter that apparently there was readings of 98 on, and that instantly gives him something to deal with lefties in a longer stint. It would be really fun. And I think, having that third or potentially fourth pitch gives him starter quality. So maybe it'll be the one that got away, but it's something to definitely dream on, and maybe they'll run him out if they need to bump up his trade value, like right before the deadline.
Let's see it. Andrew, you don't seem like a fan of it.
I've never been a fan of that, and I don't. I'm so excited to see Clay Holmes start for the Mets and just be terrible, because he wasn't like, I don't know.
Hey, I think there are a lot more relievers that I don't think people understand how many relievers have made the transition the last few years. It's actually becoming more common.
And that's the thing. You don't know. There's been so many recently. You have no idea what Helsley, for example, what he's going to be in that transition.
Totally.
Like if you told me or anyone that the velocity would hold upon that transition, he would be a starter yesterday.
Yeah.
But you don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
And just the injury stuff. Like I don't need him to be doing that in Milwaukee, or when he's probably like, honestly, probably not on the team in August. So, sorry.
We'll see.
But
someone else who might not be on the team in August, Andrew,
as Nolan Arenado, who I'm hopeful can apparently he might not even get traded, or he might still get traded before opening day. That's what I've been hearing from. That's what Katie Wu said this morning on Foul Territory on a clip that I saw. So
okay.
Someone else reported that a couple days ago, but I don't trust that source. Anyway, just before we get completely off the rails, just Arenado, his power output kind of was just not great last year. What was it? 16 home runs, career lows in all those categories. How does Nolan Arenado bounce back this year? Like, is there a way to salvage what's left of his career, or is he just kind of cooked?
So I think we'll learn a lot. He was obviously hurt for a lot of last year, and he has publicly said he's a guy who will play through injury, doesn't want to go in the IL, will play through whatever. And I think we saw that a lot last year. In addition to that, he also has slowly changed his batted ball profile in a concerning manner. What he was most known for when he came to St. Louis was pulling fly balls. He hit more pulled fly balls than just about anyone in baseball. In 2021, when he joined the Cardinals, all of his batted balls, 18% of them were pulled fly balls, and that led to 30 homer seasons and all of the accolades that come with that. But each year since then, it has slowly kind of decreased until 2024. He had just an 11% pulled fly ball rate, and that's still a respectable number. But the problem is that he wasn't doing damage on it either. He went from in 2021 and through 2023, he was slugging or expected slugging on those pulled fly balls was anywhere from like the 800 to 900 range, which is exceptional. That means those pulled fly balls are becoming homers, becoming doubles, extra base hits, whatever. Last year, it was halved basically to 449, which is an atrocious figure, completely, out of his career norms. And I think really shows that he was not healthy. And I think if he comes into this year and shows that he is healthy, we could see him repeat 2023. I know 23 by his standards was a down year, but if he hits a 260 average with 26 homers this year, I think almost everyone is happy with that output from Nolan Arenado.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's in everyone's best interest for him to play well. First, he's a future Hall of Famer wearing the birds on the bat. So that will always be a good thing to watch. But secondly, given his contract, he's not going to be a player who loses plate appearances to a young player, no matter how good or bad he is playing. So, if he is going to play well, he is either going to help this team maybe sneak into the playoffs with 84 wins, or he's going to play his way to a team that he wants to go to. But I think if he's healthy and really comes out with something to prove and to get back to his roots, we could see him more than certainly have some sort of a resurgence.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what happens with Nato this season. Andrew, you had something you were going to jump in, or unless you're moving to Gorm. But
no, I just think that the most likely scenario I see happening is that he just plays better and plays himself into a trade, because one of these, 5 teams that he's looking at, which I don't. Do we know all 5 teams that were?
We know 4 by Derek Gould, where it's New York, Boston, Dodgers, Padres, and then mystery 5th team, which is probably the Angels.
That's just terrible. That the Angels are that team, but clearly winning is not priority number one. And
the other 4 teams are.
Right,
so it's fair to be if I can go to a contender, I will, but also I'll go to Southern California if I can too.
To go to a situation that's infinitely worse than we have here. That team. Artie Moreno is just lying about his revenues, but that's okay. That's a different story. But it definitely could happen where one of these teams loses a third baseman, or has a third baseman that doesn't want to play third base anymore in Boston.
Hey, Heim's in St. Louis now, though. So
I know, right? But I don't want that defense in St. Louis either.
I'll take the bat any day. Give me Rafi Devers bat.
Yeah. But even the Yankees, they have a third baseman. He's just not very good. And if they decide that they want to go all in at the trade deadline, like DJ LeMahieu or Oswaldo Cabrera, whoever they're going to slot in at third base, it's not going to be very good. So I think there could be a fit for Arenado if he just plays better. And you might actually get something back for him as well. You just never know. If the Yankees are one piece short, that's the team that I would look at. And it'd be weird to see him and Goldie in the playoffs together. But yeah, another player we wanted to talk about is Nolan Gorman. Obviously, the strikeout rate just unplayable last year. Would have broken a league record if he had gotten the number of plate appearances he needed to qualify. But what does Nolan Gorman need to do to have a bounce back season? Because he was like fine in 2023, and then in 2024 just seemed completely lost at the plate with certain pitches that he crushed in the year prior.
Yeah, it's the almost exact opposite to Jordan Walker. Jordan Walker, could not lay off those pitches down in the dirt. With Gorman, he just kind of lost the ability to crush fastballs in the upper third of the zone. That's how he broke out in 2023. Pitchers were targeting him up in the zone with fastballs, saying, we don't think that your bat can match us there. And eventually they'd make a mistake, work a little bit lower into the zone, and boom, that's a homer. That's just a ball Gorman crushes. Last year, the pitchers challenged him a little bit higher in the zone, and Gorman just was consistently missing. He was just missing. It wasn't necessarily like whiffs. I mean, the visual we have here is his WOBA on fastballs, where there's basically nothing in that upper third and minimal results in the middle third. And in 2023, he was crushing things that were in the middle third. But the whiff rate on the fastball wasn't necessarily horrendous, but he was just popping everything up. He had one of the highest, launch angles on average on fastballs in the zone. And we've all seen it where, Gorman sees a pitch that we all think should be crushed for a homer. It gets popped up to the second baseman. He tosses the bat as he, runs out the bases. And it's like we want to see so much more. And it feels like it was right there every time.
Yeah. Let me look at this again for a second, because on YouTube, it's harder to see. I'm zooming in on my phone. Do I see triple zeros in the middle upper part of the zone and middle inside, or high and inside?
Yes,
that's insane.
It is 0.98 WOBA on up and away, triple zeros in the middle, and triple zeros up and in.
That's horrible. I didn't even realize it was that bad.
And it just gives pitchers, if they can throw a fastball in the zone up there. Why not? That is a free strike, a free out, free weak contact. You're going to do that every day.
Yeah. And I even think last year, and something I talked about a little bit earlier, but we have a special guest on Sunday, and I kind of want to ask him about this a little bit, because I think he'll have a good perspective and people will see that who it is soon. But for some reason, Cardinals could not figure out fastballs last year. And it makes me think a lot of that. Obviously, that doesn't mean there isn't mechanical stuff going on, approach stuff going on. But it felt like a lot of the offense was in their own heads last year. And for Gorm to go from a guy that smokes fastballs over the fence and you really couldn't challenge him. And Kyle Reese has been someone who's been good on this, where it feels like throughout his minor league career, when Gorm would figure things out, the breaking ball, he started to struggle more with the fastball. And when he was on the fastball, he was more susceptible to the breaking ball. So there's a little bit of a give and take with that there. But to be literally a 0-0-0 WOBA in the top of the zone, or top high and away 0.98, is insanely bad. And so, in your opinion, is this mostly just Gorm's got to get out of his own head and be comfortable again and ready to mash? Or is there anything you notice in his swing profile, swing playing, whatever it is, his approach, that lends you to believe that he can't do this? Because I even think, to your point, he hits those pop-ups, but also I remember a lot of times last year where 0-2 and he's just watches a fastball go by him because he's not even ready for it. He's just not ready to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I really want to say that, we can't know for sure, but I think part of it had to have been some sort of coaching or philosophy for the team, because we saw very similar steps back for two of our young promising hitters in Gorman and Walker. Sure, was it in the realm of outcomes of things that they could do completely naturally? Sure. But it's just such a similar, they have this whole flaw in their approach that pitchers are taking advantage of and they couldn't do anything about. And they're not crushing they weren't getting the bailout, here's a mistake pitch, crushed for a homer, they're going to go on a hot streak. It just never felt like we saw that. So I'm wondering if just, fresh coaching, new philosophy, kind of the reset of expectations there will help them get back to it. I know from a purely Gorman profile, I know he tweaked his stance a little bit and was a little bit more closed, which I think negatively impacted him. Just as he swung, it made it a little bit harder for him to get to that up and in pitch, to get the barrel up, and maybe can explain the triple zeros, but that is a purely anecdotal analysis of watching video, kind of seeing what I think I see, but I don't know, how true that is. I think just, having new coaching in there should hopefully fix a lot of this.
Yeah. And I mean, spring training, you're always going to hear, you never really walk into camp unless you're with the Red Sox right now. And it seems like a dumpster fire with communication. Most of the time you're coming in, everyone's like, oh, this new hire is great. And this new player is great. And it's always rainbows and butterflies, but it does seem like an extra layer of optimism with Brant Brown right now. And especially sometimes you just hear blanket statements, generalizations about guys like, oh, they're great. And it's like, okay, you didn't really give me a lot there, but this, how in depth they get about his ability to speak to players based on whether they're a field guy, analytical guy, mechanically driven guy, biometrics guy, that he's able to speak all the languages. And also, to your point earlier, how giddy Jordan Walker is talking about hitting now, when he was a guy that almost got frustrated when people would ask him about what's going on, that he just really kind of shut down. It was you could just tell he really wasn't in a good space with it. And now he's getting into the nitty gritty and the details with people. It seems like something's been reinvigorated in him. So it'd be really exciting to see what happens with that this year. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was just going to say, we are a year removed from them going how many spring training games without hitting a homer? And the narrative around the Cardinals offense was so much struggling. Is it cause for concern that not hitting a homer in spring training, is going to suggest something about the season? And we were already kind of in panic mode before the season already went underway. So I think, obviously we have to play the spring training games and hopefully they hit some homers a little bit earlier. But I think that just kind of added to the pressure and how much all of these players were very clearly pressing throughout the year. And this, obviously there are still expectations to some level, but just, telling Gorman and Walker that they're basically going to get 650 plate appearances regardless of what happens is probably this huge, vote of confidence that, these guys can go in, get their work in, and not have to worry about the media clamoring, fans clamoring, or even, the front office clamoring that changes need to happen, or else something's going to happen to their role.
For sure. We were one of the people last year that me and Andrew, I don't know how much Andrew cared, but as a podcast, we were like, it's spring training. The home run stuff is being overblown. And we were.
I didn't care at all.
Yeah,
but now in hindsight, it's pretty funny. But
yeah,
they moved the walls in. I don't know. It would be funny if they hit one on Saturday and then they go a week without hitting one because the Saturday game is not televised. So it could just be fake, it might not actually happen.
Ollie lied. Oh man. But then also to your point about the pressure last year too, it's you come off of 2023 where it was one of the worst seasons in franchise history, and they're running it back with the same lineup basically, and they're coming in with they're hoping. Obviously they're going to tell you they really like the pitching staff, but outside looking in, you're like, okay, it's an average at best rotation, so you're hoping the offense can carry you to rebound next year, and the guys you're relying on are a bunch of young 20s, second-year players, first-year players, kind of third-year players, and that's a lot of pressure to put on guys, and then they get off to a slow start as a team. It makes sense how this stuff can compound over time, and the fact that they did such a reset this offseason with, on the Major League roster, not so much, but with the coaching staff, hitting coach specifically, and then resetting expectations to be yeah, obviously they think they can be better than what people are giving them credit for, but obviously at the end of the day, Jordan Walker's not going to get demoted to AAA at the end of April if things aren't going well. Gorm's going to be there the whole season if things aren't going well. To your point, I think there's something to be said about. I think people hate hearing the term at this point. It's said all the time, but the runway, right? Having some runway here gives you the ability to fail and not worry about your job the next day. But we kind of want to finish off with another. Well, one of the only big ticket item they brought in last offseason in a rotation overhaul, and that was Sonny Gray, who, again, you look beneath the surface, I'm pretty sure that was a career high strikeout percentage from him. His sweeper was just incredible again. The FIP was great again. Like, there's a lot of things to love, but the home run rate had ballooned after being, I think, again, a career low the year before. And for some odd reason, Sonny Gray historically has been better on the road than he's been at home. Some of that's probably because he's pitched in ballparks like Great American Small Park or Yankee Stadium and stuff like that in his career. But still, he's been a good road pitcher. And I think he had an ERA over 5 on the road this year, and it was sub 3 at Busch Stadium. Is there anything? I mean, some of that home roads, I don't know how much you can do with that other than that was just weird. But like the home run rate, specifically home road stuff, if you have anything on that, or just anything in Sonny Gray's profile where he can go from the underlying stuff looked good last year, but obviously left. I think it's fair to say he left things to be desired when it comes to like ERA, the outputs. I mean, there's just some starts that's like you don't expect that from your frontline guy. Anything that he can do differently this year to be that dependable number 1, number 2 type starter for the Cardinals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. So I was looking at, both the road splits and the home run issue, and they go hand in hand. Last year, he had 3 games where he surrendered 3 or more homers.
Yeah.
That was equivalent to his last 8 years combined before that.
Cool.
And naturally, all 3 of those games were on the road.
Yeah.
So you throw those games out. It was still an ERA of 4 on the road. But I think it's like home run rate is just this really volatile thing. Obviously some players are really good at preventing home runs generally, but there is just this such random variance to one batted ball event. A lot of the time a pitcher can throw a perfect pitch and, really good hitter at the plate was guessing correctly, whatever. And they hit a homer, not on the pitcher. It was just the nature of it. It's why, expected FIP uses league average home run rate because it is just such a random stat at times. I think could it be that, as he's aged a little bit, it is, mid to upper 30s that, there's a little bit less command and a little bit less velocity. So he's, susceptible to homers, but he still had a 1.14 homer per 9 last year, which was including those blow up games. And that was the league average for homers per 9. So not the end of the world. Yeah. And most projection systems have him bouncing back to a 1 homer per 9, which, worse than his career norm, which makes sense because he's aging, but that's not too bad. And going back to the, his ERA being 4 away from home, I don't think it really matters for him just because home road splits, I feel have the most utility given, if someone plays in Colorado or Seattle, where it does have this just general park factor to it.
Yeah.
But, St. Louis plays more friendly to pitchers than hitters, but only slightly these days. So maybe, in his first year in St. Louis, he was more comfortable and had his routine with, going from his house to the ballpark in St. Louis compared to whatever different travel the Cardinals have than the Twins when they're on the road. But I think that's something that the variance won't be nearly as bad, and he'll definitely figure it out. And, I think he could highly repeat 2024's general numbers with, closer to the FIP. If he posts a 3.1, 3.2 ERA with a, 27, 28% strikeout rate, I think everyone will kind of be happy on what this year is for Sonny Gray.
For sure. I mean, that's the hope and the dream at this point for Gray. And I mean, again, we talked about Arenado, Gorm, Walker. I mean, really all the guys in the gambit today, what they need to do to improve and to make good on promise or to maximize their profiles. But as we kind of wrap up the conversation today, as you look at the St. Louis Cardinals team that, in all honesty, the variance we talked about with each of these players, it feels like this team has so much variance where this could be a last place team, a bottom 5 team in baseball. And I'd be surprised if they're that bad, but I wouldn't be shocked. And they could push for a playoff spot. Would I be surprised? A little bit, but would I be shocked? No. And they could be something in between. Where do you see this club trending in 2025?
I think, all of the the projected win totals all kind of have them around 75, 77 wins. And I think that's kind of spot on because I don't think they're going to win 77 games, but they could win 85. They could win 70. We really don't know, but I think there's just a lot of enthusiasm, maybe not on the fan side, as we had the great reset with nothing, but there seems to be legitimate energy by at least the position players. Yeah. So if they're going to be a bad team, they may slug their way to, a fun summer and, not a great record, but enough steps forward where you have these young arms come up either this year or, at the beginning of next year, where you can see everything coming back into place. And I think it's going to be a fun year for Cardinals fans because you have all of these young players who have the opportunity to take step forwards. And I don't think me or anyone really anticipates that all of them are going to take the same step backwards that they did in 2024.
Yeah. This will be a two-parter, so you can answer whichever way first, and I'm putting you on the spot here. And they're kind of impossible questions because saying who are the most important players, it's like, well, in theory, like we could say Wilson Contreras isn't, but like if he doesn't hit, like they're screwed, right? Like he needs to hit. So, but let me ask this one first. Is there someone that isn't being talked about a lot on the roster, or someone that like potentially is a prospect right now that could make an impact this year? They're like, hey, this could be a potential X factor. It doesn't mean they're going to be like a star this year, but someone who could help their bullpen out a lot, or could be an interesting bat in the lineup, or one of the rotation pieces or young arms that could factor into the rotation at some point and make a maybe not Palante level impact, but could be an impactful arm that raises their ceiling a little bit. Is there anyone that's kind of under the radar right now that you're like, hey, I'm keeping an eye on this guy because he could help them win some games this year?
Yeah, I think that's Michael McGreevy. We've seen a lot of confidence coming from the front office and the coaching staff about him. And even as these pitching prospects come up, we obviously don't know how successful they're going to be. But, even in the world where Tink Hence, Quinn Matthews, maybe even Cooper Jerpy come up in the next year or two and are good, you need guys to fill the other innings. And there's no one you'd rather have than a dependable arm who can go, 6-7 innings potentially, even if it's a 4.1, 4.2 ERA, do enough to be a back of the end starter that, if one offseason the Cardinals are like, we're going to go out and get an ace, whether by trade or free agency, and he's the guy who gets the boot, okay, so be it. But you need to have these glue guys. You can't just rely on your star prospects to come up. And the Cardinals have done a good job of this historically. They've always produced really good big league talent that is not upper echelon big league talent. And as the front office transitions, we need to see them continue to develop that in addition to the stars that everyone is kind of eyeing in on. And I think that will be the true barometer of where this front office and organization is heading. If we're going to see, are they going to get back to the successful years of the 2010s of consistent winning, or is this going to be closer to what other organizations have dealt with in the ebbs and flows of a life cycle?
Yeah, McGreevy, like that type of arm is something I'm keeping my eye on too, because I was doing the math last year or this offseason. I think 34% of the Cardinals starts since 2021 or 2020 have come from arms they've developed themselves, that they've had to go out or at least were on pre-arb or renewable contracts. That it was Adam Wainwright, it was Miles Michaelis, it was Kyle Gibson, Jose Quintana, J.A. Happ. It was those veteran arms that they keep bringing in. And you look at the offense, and it's like they were able to invest in a Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado and bringing in Wilson Contreras to have these huge contracts because they had all these young controllable bats in the lineup that allowed them to go out and spend big money. Look at the rotation. They consistently kept paying these mid to low back end of the rotation arms big money, and big money is in like more money than you'd have to pay Michael McGreevy. And that limits the ability to go out and be aggressive and go after the top of the market arms. Again, some of that's philosophy stuff on their end where they get a little shaky with arms and paying those guys. And in general, they don't love paying guys. But it's your point. If you can have 4 or 5 Michael McGreevy's, every team would love to have that. But if you have a few of those guys at the back end of the rotation where they're not stars, but you don't pay them anything and they can fill the role that Kyle Gibson would have for $13 million, you can stack some cash on top of each other. Maybe instead of looking at Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson one offseason, you're looking at Sonny Gray and Nathan Eovaldi types, right? Like you can shoot higher with things. But okay, and then I know this is an impossible question. I'm going to ask it, but what are some players this year that you do think, okay, if they're going to hit the high end of their variance, these are going to have the guys who have to make good on their promise for that to happen?
I mean, I think it comes down to Lars Nootbaar, and Jordan Walker, right? Those are the guys that I think 90% of Cardinals fans look at, and it's like, that can be the future of my franchise. Yeah, I'd love to see some steps forward by even Herrera and, you know, some others, and Mason Wynn as well. I know we didn't talk about him, and he definitely has star potential, but the Cardinals need that impact 3 hitter that's going to hit for good average, going to hit a bunch of home runs, going to be the one guy that you don't want to face in the playoffs because they have a look in their eye that they're going to do damage every time they step to the plate. And the 2 guys I see that being are Nootbaar and Walker. And they both, like, they have shown the skills at the big league level in small samples, in larger samples in Nootbaar's case, that it just needs to come together. And I think if you even see one of them put it together, like start to put it together this year, it's one of those things where the ball can get rolling, and like there's almost no end in sight of where you're dreaming on, because the Cardinals really have not had a star like that developed or even on the roster in their prime in, you know, more time than I think any of us really want to admit.
Yeah. I mean, you felt like you're starting to get that in 2021 with Tyler O'Neill, right? Like that kind of season, if you could see that out of a Jordan Walker, a Lars Nootbaar, Nolan Gorman, or something like that, like the pressure it even took off of Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado that year too, veterans who were MVP caliber players. Like you could see that, and the pressure it took off of the rest of that young outfield at the time. If one of those guys can step up, we'll see what happens. But again, that's the name of the game this year. It's like if possibly, and every team has ifs, but it feels like the Cardinals have more than others. So Andrew, anything on the way out? Or
yeah, spring training games are coming. Excited to see what happens. Honestly, need to take them with a grain of salt though, because the Dodgers just lost 12-4 because their reliever, some of their pitching prospects and relievers were bad, and that's fine. Giovanni Gallegos pitched a scoreless inning though, so
my gosh,
tough.
Add it to the list of former Cardinals. What is happening?
No,
just kidding.
Anyway,
Gio will now. This right, Gio's going to be like reliever of the year for some reason. He's going to save 50 games for the Dodgers. But
we'll end up starting game 1 for them for somehow, some way.
They'll figure it out. Oh man. Well, Nate, it's been super fun having you on today. We're gonna have to do it again sometime. Really appreciate your in-depth analysis. I really appreciate the way that you're able to contextualize some of this stuff that we all anecdotally can see at times, but it's hard to like put numbers or put metrics to it, or these graphs even to it. So really appreciate your time. Is there anything, or do you want to plug any ways people can find you, whether it's on social media or Pitchers List?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, X @_ Nate Schwartz, or Blue Sky at nschwartz.bsky.app. And I'm writing at Pitcher List weekly right now as we get ramped up for the season, mostly doing articles about, you know, guys I think are going to take a step forward, different things that happened last year. And, you know, it's not all Cardinals focused, but I do know that I write more about the Cardinals than any other team. So, you know, be on the lookout for that. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm fine. I'm happy we were able to finally get this together. And I always like talking Cardinal baseball.
Well, I appreciate it. We'll have to do it again sometime, especially as we start to see some of the stuff happen and see some new developments, and we'll have to see what happens. But again, thanks again, Nate, for coming on. As Andrew teased earlier, we've got a fun episode coming out on Saturday. You all can check out. We have a really fun interview coming Sunday that we can't wait to share with everyone. But until next time, thanks for jumping on, and go Cardinals.
Whoa.